Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. You're watching In the Studio. I'm your host, Lin Weaver. The program is brought to you by Davis Media Access, and it's broadcast on Davis Community Television. That's Comcast Channel 15 and AT&T UVerse Menu 99. We're also online at dctv.davismedia.org. Today's topic is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. And the reason we're talking about this is because many of our citizens and activists are very concerned about the lack of transparency by the administration and about what the negotiations are all about. So I have guests here tonight who will help us to understand what the Trans-Pacific Partnership is, and also try to unravel some of the key points and some of the concern about these negotiations. My guests are Jim Leonard, Nancy Price, and Nick Buxton. Jim Leonard is an activist, a writer, and a longtime resident of Davis, as well as a community developer. And Nancy Price is a resident of Davis since 1973, with a long list of impressive achievements. One highlight of local community involvement was with the Save the Open Space group that in 1985 and 86 saved Central Park from being turned into a 3-tiered shopping mall after the City Council voted 4-1 to do so. She also served on the Planning Commission in the early 1990s, and since 2002, Nancy is the co-chair of the national organization Alliance for Democracy and on the leadership team of several other state and national organizations, making a real difference for the good of the community. Nancy is currently working with a broad coalition of groups to stop Fast Track and the TPP, as well as establish municipal and county TPP free zones. Nick Buxton is a communication consultant working on media, publications, and online communications for the Transnational Institute, a worldwide fellowship of scholar activists. And he's been based in California since 2008, and prior to that, he lived in Bolivia for 4 years, I believe. Mm-hmm. Jim, Nancy, and Nick, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really very grateful that you took the time to be on our show.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start with Jim, since he's mic one. Jim, what do we know about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP? Can you give us the 30-second pitch on that?
Yes, I can. And the TPP is actually very complex, so a short statement may give you the impression that it's more simple than it actually is.
All right.
But basically, in a nutshell, it's been called NAFTA on steroids.
I like that.
It's corporations being in a superior position as far as their rules go to the laws of the country. So if the environmental laws of a signatory country
yes.
Are in conflict with profit that a company might make, the company will end up winning and will end up having to pay some kind of fine as a result.
I see. How much do we know about what is being negotiated? I know that some things have been leaked, but do we know that stage of the negotiation? I mean, are they close to an agreement, or we don't really know much about what is going on?
Well, when there's different places and times where the negotiations happen, and we know when that's happening. We don't know the contents.
I see.
And I think we've gone through 19 meetings so far, and President Obama's goal is to have everything wrapped up by the end of this year.
I see. Now, is the Congress aware of what is going on at the moment?
Congress is as aware as the public, which means we know very, very little, and it's as a result of leaked information. They've absolutely been kept in the blind. And there's and part of this has to do with fast track, which we will explain later.
Yes, fast track. We will talk about that. But let's show the one of the slides that show the extent of the countries participating or being part of this Trans-Pacific partnership. Perhaps Jim or Nancy, do you want to describe a little bit what we're seeing there? Basically, we see Australia and New Zealand and some of the Philippines and Malaysia. Yeah.
Yes. Well, there are now 12 countries.
Yes.
That are negotiating, and if you just start at the southwest of the map,
yes,
and move around, it's New Zealand, Australia, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, Vietnam, Japan, and then you move across to Canada, the United States. Mexico is sort of off the map a little bit there, it seems, at least the slide is.
Yes.
Peru and Chile. And what's interesting about this trade agreement, which is unique to the TPP, it did not occur in NAFTA, is it includes a docking agreement.
Yes.
Which means...
Can you please explain the docking agreement?
Yeah, which means that any other country in the Pacific Rim, or even outside of the Pacific Rim, could, if they agree to the provisions, sign on. So just in September, Taiwan has indicated that they're interested in considering joining the TPP.
I see.
So this has a potential of becoming an enormous regional trade agreement, larger than NAFTA, which includes 3 countries, and larger than CAFTA, which includes 6.
I understand. So the scope
Is enormous.
Is the magnitude of this. Jim, you mentioned before that we know very little about this. And why do you think we know very little about this? What is your take on this?
Well,
and why are you alarmed in a way or concerned?
I'm alarmed because every single area which is important to the average person that lives in the U.S. is impacted by this. So if you don't want to have your wages stay stagnant or go down, you're alarmed. If you're concerned about the internet freedoms, you're alarmed. If you're concerned about whether you're consuming GMOs and you want to have labeling, you're alarmed. Anything and everything that you can imagine is impacted by this.
So this TPP encompasses several aspects of what can be trade agreements.
Yeah.
If I could say something here.
Absolutely.
When people think about trade agreements, they generally think, we sell computers to China and they sell us the components. Or there's people's understanding of trade is rice goes one way and corn goes another way. And I think what's really important to understand here is trade agreements are very, very little has to do with actually trade of goods and commerces as we understand trade. In fact, only 5 of 29 chapters in this agreement have anything to do with trade. 24 of them have to do with government regulations over environment. They have to do with services, whether health and environmental education services should be opened up to the private sector or not. They have to do with pharmaceuticals, about whether medicine should be given particular protection above people's health and human rights. They have to do with regulations that we put in place to protect our environment. So a lot of these negotiations that are going on really have nothing to do with trade.
Yes.
And that's why there's a lot of alarm about this, because we've seen this gradual pattern emerging over a series of trade agreements, where each time large corporations have been lobbying to say, how can we use trade to minimize any kind of regulations that will limit our profits? And that's
yes.
why it's such a major concern to us.
It is a major concern, and I understand that also it would have to do with copyright laws and internet freedom in some ways.
Yeah.
Now, I must stress, though, in all fairness, that this is based, your information that you're describing is based on what has been leaked, since we must stress that there is a lack of transparency. Yes, Nancy.
Well, it's not just based on what's been leaked.
All right.
Because we have the experience of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, between Canada, Mexico, and the U.S.
Yes.
That was signed in 1994, and we have then, 94, 2004, we have 15 years or more of experience
Yes.
from the effects of the NAFTA agreement. And then we also have the World Trade Organization, which was signed in 1995, and we have the experience of the impact of that agreement, which includes now, presently, 159 countries. So we know the impact of NAFTA. It did not deliver the promises of jobs, improvement in the economy, reducing the U.S. trade deficit. In fact, the U.S. trade deficit went up 2 times. Income for Mexicans declined. About 1 million jobs flew out of the U.S. So we have that experience. We also have the NAFTA experience of the investment protection chapter that protects corporate investment and profit, the way Jim was describing, and the fact that the NAFTA and the WTO created secret international trade tribunals where 3 corporate lawyers decide whether national laws are preventing corporations to realize their future profits. And there have been many of these cases that Nick can tell us about. So although 2 chapters have been leaked,
Yes.
the investment chapter has been leaked, and then another chapter which is new to the TPP, which is called the Regulatory Coherence Chapter. So when Nick mentioned that these trade agreements mandate that you harmonize between countries or among countries national laws, this Regulatory Coherence Chapter means that within countries, all agencies now need to begin to harmonize laws among all the national agencies, which drives down regulation. So it's not just from the leaked chapters, it's from experience of what these trade agreements do.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for clarifying this. It needed to be said. Now, the way I understand from our previous conversation, what makes it even more alarming is the fact that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there is the fear that the so-called legislation called fast track may be reinstated. Could any one of you tell us what fast track is, apart from that thing that you put on the car
Right.
when you
Well,
go
that's
to
exactly
San
what it is.
Francisco?
Nick, you want to talk about fast track? That's exactly what it is.
Yes, that's
in
what-
fact,
yeah.
what fast track means in terms of Congress
Yes.
is that the
Tell
president...
us a little bit about the history. How
Yeah.
did it come about?
Well,
I
in
believe it was
yeah.
Nixon.
It was Nixon.
Yes.
So in 1971, Nixon created fast track, and it's been the mechanism by which the president asks Congress to give up their U.S. constitutional right to oversee trade with foreign nations, to legislate trade with foreign nations. So Congress, because they are for whatever reasons, political reasons, they vote away their congressional authority, their constitutional authority, to the president to negotiate these agreements. Then he sends a letter to Congress and says, I want to reinstitute fast track. It's good for every 5 years, for 5 years.
Yes.
And it was reinstituted under Bush in 2002 and lapsed in 2007. So now Obama wants it back. And so he's alerted Congress that he will submit a request, but the request has not been submitted yet. It's expected to be submitted any day now. So that's why there's a lot of organization going around now to stop fast track, because if we stop fast track, then we can have a debate about the TPP.
Right.
But fast track means that the bill is submitted to Congress. There's no amendment.
Yes.
There's limited discussion and debate. The entire process must take place within 90 days, and once it goes to the floor of the House and the Senate, there are only 20 hours of discussion. But that discussion is really mute because, in fact, there's no amending. So there's no discussion and no amendment.
Yes.
And it's a majority vote.
Yes.
So, in fact, on such a complicated agreement, which they only see
Yes.
when it's finally submitted to them.
Yes. But isn't it true that Congress can reject?
Oh yes, they can.
So they do. They've not given away totally all their powers, but they cannot modify these agreements. They can either approve, vote for it, or reject. Isn't that true?
Correct, but
Yeah.
that is not what our legislative process allows in normal circumstances.
I agree.
Right.
I agree.
And the NAFTA agreement was 1,700 pages of very complex provisions.
Yes.
So
To be read in less than 20 hours.
well, no, they have it for 90 days.
90 days.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the reason this is being kept secret, admittedly, the former U.S. trade representative, who's the chief negotiator, has said that if this text saw the light of day, it would be rejected because it's so adverse and so impacts communities and individuals, and it impacts nature and the environment in such severe ways that it would be rejected.
So, thank you, Nancy. That was really clarified everything. So, Nick, if you were to really describe this, would you say that the TPP is the invention of corporations who want to increase their profits?
Absolutely. I think what we're seeing is I mean, there was something in the newspaper in Britain the other day that this is the biggest frontal assault in democracy that we've seen in years. And I think that's the best way to describe it. What we're seeing here is one of the important things about negotiations, while it's secret to us and the public and even Congress, there are 600 corporate trade advisors intimately involved in the negotiations. And they write their wish lists of all the regulations that they would like to see eliminated. They won't get all of them, but each time they get a trade deal, they advance and reduce minimum and regulations. I guess what I want to communicate is that we really need to have is how this will affect people, because it can seem quite abstract as an issue. But how does this affect someone living in Davis?
Yes.
And I think there are different ways, and we can see this from what has happened. So I think one of the concrete ways it affects us will be that it will lower food standards. That's one of the things that's been negotiated, is how to minimise, and like Nancy was saying, to kind of lowest common denominator. How do we lower the standards that are put in place here by the
And Jim mentioned the genetically modified products
and it would
as well.
and also regulations that and also initiatives that we choose to put in place. In California, we've got a whole initiative process which come from Britain. I find at least a great kind of practice of democracy. But if we put in initiatives, for example, to ban fracking, we could actually be sued under these trade agreements to stop that.
Right.
And in fact, that's already happened. In Canada, Quebec, they put a moratorium on fracking, and there's a US company now suing Canada, the Quebec, for 250 million for lost profits. So it means that our practice of democracy is going to be undermined. It affects people who, in their digital rights, we had a huge fight a few months ago about a really pernicious bill called SOPA, and a lot of digital activists got involved and stopped that in Congress. Well, they're now trying to get through exactly the same provisions in this trade treaty. And so there's lots of different ways that it's going to affect people. It affects our right to vote, it affects our right to regulate, and to protect our health and environment. And just to give you a couple of examples, I'm not talking about things, as well as this fracking case, there's also, in Uruguay, they decided for health reasons to put increased labelling on packages of tobacco.
Yes.
And now Philip Morris is suing the Uruguayan state for daring to do that, saying that it's affecting their profits. And yet this is something to protect people's health and to promote good public health, to reduce tobacco consumption. So we're seeing an increasing number of these cases, and what it's really allowed in the last 10 years is a wave of litigation against states worth millions and millions of dollars. There are now something like 500 cases, and as Nancy says, these are heard in tiny corporate courts, privatized justice. It's in secretive courts.
Three corporate lawyers.
Three corporate lawyers
Making the decision.
For millions of people.
For millions of us, and we have no representation in those courts, and we can't appeal the decision.
And so that's, this is the justice which is undermining our rights to decide our own futures.
I would say even more undermining. It's basically taking away our rights in many cases, isn't it? But why, and I'm speculating here on a philosophical basis, why do you think the Obama administration, a Democratic administration, would want to do that? I mean, I'm asking you. And be candid. I mean, we have freedom of speech.
Well, may I just say that?
Yes.
I just want to add a footnote here. In 2008, Obama campaigned against Hillary Clinton that he would repeal NAFTA or renegotiate NAFTA because he did not want the impacts on labor, community health, the environment, etc.
Yes, I remember that.
So you can ask your question of Nick. I'd love to know how Nick would answer this.
I mean, why would he do that? I mean...
Well, I think this is something that's happening in America. I think it's happening in Europe. It's happening around the world.
Yes.
Increasingly, we have corporations with more rights than citizens.
Yes.
They push that in lots of different ways.
Yes.
We see it in the way that they buy elections and the huge amounts of money that goes into elections here.
Yes.
We see it in decisions made in the Supreme Court, such as the Citizens United case. And trade is another way of doing this. What's disturbing about trade, particularly for me, is it means that even if we undo some of those victories, we can then be sued for making democratic decisions which regulate corporations.
Well, we've talked about the problem, we've dissected the problem, alarmed, hopefully, our viewers and everybody, but now what do we do about it? I mean, you're in a position already, you've been doing something. Can we be a little more specific, and perhaps we can call the slide about all the organizations that are now involved in trying to stop this. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah.
And while we're getting the visuals there...
That's fast track.
Yes. Oh, that's the fast track. We need the last slide. This is the explanation of the slide.
There it is,
yes, there it is. So, Nancy, well, I'll start with Jim again. What do we do? I know you've done something already. You've written a letter to your congressman about this.
Well, I wrote a letter to the Enterprise, actually, and got it published.
Good.
And
the Davis Enterprise, the local paper.
The local paper. And there are some internet groups that are asking us to sign on and send messages to the Congress to not support fast track and not support the TPP.
Right.
I've done that. I've done this television show, and right now,
yes.
Nancy told me about something which is called the TPP free zones, which sound extremely interesting. And
Nancy, would you like to
perhaps she can-
chime in for briefly?
Yes, briefly.
Yes.
Well, the organization I co-chair, the Alliance for Democracy, has launched a campaign for communities and counties to establish TPP-free zones. And we just launched it last week, but so far Dane County, Wisconsin, and Madison, Wisconsin, which sits in Dane County, have both passed unanimously TPP-free zones that state they are against fast track and they are against the TPP. Should the TPP be passed by Congress, they will then not obey the will of Congress, and they will establish a TPP-free zone where they do not recognize any of the provisions under the TPP.
Yes.
So we call this a "We Will Not Obey" campaign of community resistance. And I'd just like to give a moment of background. In 1997 and 8, when the multilateral agreement on investments was proposed, there was a global mobilization, and there was also a campaign for MAI, Multilateral Agreement and Investment, free zones. And they were passed in many communities in the United States and Canada, and the MAI was defeated. Some other trade agreements have been defeated, so we can do it. CAFTA
Wonderful.
was not passed Congress by one vote. So I think it's possible that once we really educate the public about this TPP, there's going to be a global mobilization on December 3rd.
Where?
Well, globally. So
Globally,
communities, it's going to be announced very shortly, so
Yes.
communities are being encouraged to have local campaigns, local protests and demonstrations. I think we'll organize one here in Davis with my colleagues here.
And for the public, do you have a website that they can do? I know we have displayed Alliance for Democracy. Would that be the website to go to?
No, the website to go to is www.tppfreezones.org.
Okay, good. And we'll have that displayed. And Nick, what would you like to do? We are almost out of time, but what would you like our viewers to do to help this cause?
Well, I think you had that quote from the former trade negotiator for Obama who said, if this treaty saw the light of day, then people would mobilize against it and stop it. So that's a message to us. We need to mobilize against this and stop it.
And stop it,
And,
yes.
and I believe we can. This is a treaty like Dracula. If it sees the light of day, then it will be killed off.
Wonderful. I'm afraid we're out of time. Jim Leonard, Nancy Price, and Nick Buxton, thank you so much for all you do for our community and for being on our show. You've been watching, and thank you, of course, all of you for watching from home. You've been watching in the studio. I'm your host, Lin Weaver. You can watch the show again at if you go to our website, dctv.davismedia.org. And again, thank you, and see you next time.